Literally, when Megan Rapinoe's national women's soccer team played the Dallas under-15s, they lost 8-2. They were under-15-year-old boys.
Piers Morgan wrecks the woke left on his show Piers Morgan Uncensored again, and this time it's not just trans women in women's sports that Piers Morgan brings up to these woke individuals, but Piers Morgan even calls out the shocking woke pride celebrations that now, and this is not an overstatement or hyperbole, but all the videos to prove it, including what Piers Morgan is going to cover, show that children are openly, wide open, being exposed to naked men in public, and Piers Morgan calls out these woke trans supporters for this behavior, and their responses are somewhat shocking and controversial to say the least, folks, but let's jump in.
How do you feel, given that trans people want fairness and equality, how do you feel about the issue of trans athletes in women's sport, given that it's so obviously, to me and many other people, unfair and unequal?
Oh, here we go. Well, let's leave it to the experts. The different associations have agreed on different standards for different sports. It's all very relative. A recent study actually found that we're too harsh on trans people in sports and require too much, too long of a transition to a point where the equivalent cisgender person would be at a disadvantage. So it's complicated. It needs to be drawn out by the actual sports authorities rather than politicians or pundits.
So if a 6'5" 230-pound biological male boxer puts their hand up and says, "I would like to compete in women's boxing," would you be happy with that?
There are 6'5", 300-pound cis women too. Can they not compete?
They don't have the same physiology as a biological male. They don't have the same lung capacity.
They haven't
got the same muscle mass. No, they haven't. This is the whole point of the debate, is that it's not just about taking less testosterone. You have as Caitlyn Jenner has articulated very well, you have an inbuilt superior physiological advantage over biological females. That's the problem. Now, I want trans athletes...
Not necessarily. Estrogen... Look, estrogen absolutely wreaks havoc on our muscular systems, on our ability to perform in sports. And there's a reason that the rules are so strict, because it does greatly affect our capacity to participate.
Well, we'll disagree.
Yeah, I think this is where a lot of the backlash against the so-called trans community comes from, because we all agreed on that first point that this is pandering and this is companies trying to make money and so on. But when people start coming to arguments about biological males competing in female sports, and by the way, notice the conversation only happens in one direction, and there's a specific reason for that. Nobody is concerned about men's sports or boys' sports. And that is because we're biologically different. And I just think that this is the reason why this conversation has raged on for so long. It's these type of ridiculous, frankly, demands that affect women, affect half of the population, particularly those who play sports. And that's where people just get lost. And I think that's where a lot of the backlash or resentment actually is stemming from. I think in the West, most people at this point don't really care. Go ahead.
I'm going to go. I'm the only trans person here. This isn't about sports. It's about a gateway for the right to begin banning trans people from access to certain programs.
I'm not right-wing.
That's not true.
I'm not right-wing. So how do you figure that?
Yeah, Piers Morgan and this other guy, Zuby, are right, and the universal facts can be agreed on by all. And this woke transgender supporter, Ellie Ehrlich, I think is her name, doesn't understand biology, basic biology, which at this point would imply Ellie Ehrlich is completely ignorant of basic rudimentary facts. Or Ellie Ehrlich is just lying. It's one or the other, but it's always the same. When the woke left or transgender activists get confronted with facts, they ignore the question, deflect, and divert to something else because they can't bring the receipts.
No, it's
well,
not.
you certainly have right-wing views on trans folks.
I don't have right-wing views on trans folks. I just said to you, I want trans people to have fairness and equality and the same human rights as everybody else.
And even if you don't personally consider yourself on the right, it's still a gateway into banning trans people.
No, I don't want to ban trans people. I would like trans people to either compete against their own biological sex, which seems to me the easiest thing to do, or they compete in a new section altogether of trans athletes. What's wrong with that?
Yeah,
So a new separate but equal league is what you're saying.
Can I jump in here? The solution for this is very simple, and we've had the solution, as far as I know, for about a century. And this is simply to have an open sports league and a female-only sports league. A lot of what people call men's sports is not even explicitly men's sports. Anyone is allowed to participate, but because of the biological and physiological advantages men have, if you take the fastest, the strongest people in the world, the best endurance, they're all going to end up being men. That's how it's going to stack up, which is why if you want females to be able to participate in sports, you need to have a separate league because they can't compete in an open competition against men.
I agree. Let's move on, though, because there's another part of Pride I wanted to talk to you about. I'll start with you, James, on this. That there is a suggestion that it's jumped the shark. And the reason for that, and we've got some examples of this, in Seattle, a convoy of completely naked bike riders and roller skaters had some questioning just how family-friendly the event was. You got kids there watching this. In San Francisco, Pride had a fetish zone where a man lying in an inflatable pool of urine, where attendees were encouraged to urinate on him. Other booths featured participants getting spanked, whipped, and initiating sex acts on each other, all in public. And in Toronto and New York, the politics of Palestine and Israel took over, with queer, as they call themselves, protesters preventing the parade from progressing along its designated route by sitting in the middle of the road. So a lot of people saying that it's going too far. Now, James, I would say it does go too far when people do that.
I mean,
if you want to actually make Pride a family thing, which many people want it to be, how can you allow that kind of stuff?
You've given me a lot to respond to there, Piers. I would say in Germany right now at the Euros, there are English fans walking around with their dicks out, pissing in the street. I think if you go to Sweden, there are naked people everywhere, like in saunas, and it's completely fine.
You're
and normal.
comparing the fetish zone
I'm
San
saying
Francisco
that there's a naked bike ride in London very regularly, and kids walk past that naked bike ride. What you're doing is you're trying to make this a massive war against queer people, but actually this is just
I don't
all
want to war
people.
with queer people.
This is all people.
I actually
and
want
in
to
San
protect,
Francisco, where some of those people were naked at Pride recently, it's actually legal to be naked in events like that. So if you're taking your children to that, then that's on you. That's not on the queer community.
Right.
And as I said, this isn't just queer people. This is all people.
I think you touched on a point that all sort of movements can devolve to become a congregation of the mentally unwell. Yes, that is fine. But each community
Why is
must
it unwell to be naked?
You're mentally unwell if you're walking out in public naked. Yes,
Why is that mentally unwell?
Because you're mad.
So you're saying people in Sweden
you don't have
that are
clothes in your
naked
house
in saunas, is that mentally unwell?
Yeah, I think if you're leaving your house,
Just because you have shame about your body.
Yes, I have shame. I'm sorry, I was raised properly. I have shame. I don't leave my house naked.
I was raised properly. I have shame.
Yeah, I have
That's
shame. I have a sense of shame.
Now think about what he just said. It's terrible to grow up knowing what shame is. Doesn't that imply that he doesn't even believe in shame? And if you live your life with no shame at all, does that not also imply that you have no sense of true morality? Meaning good and bad, right and wrong, what you should or should not do, right? And you have woke transgender supporters like this who don't believe in shame. Well, then isn't it fair to say that individuals like this aren't really moral? Let me know in the comments what you think. Is shame good or bad? And do we or should we bring it back in society in mass? Because if having no shame leads to exposing yourself to kids in spicy, shall we say, manners, and urinating on each other and just degenerate behavior out in public, then maybe for the betterment of society itself and the majority of the people in it and families and children, we should be brave enough to call out madness and depravity for what it is.
I don't think that it's all about me and what I want. I actually think of the
people
public.
out there because
Well, here's the thing. Here's the point. You made a significant point, which is that there is a tendency for all movements to devolve into some sort of congregation of the mentally unwell, which is fine.
I never said that. That's literally not what I said.
I'm finessing what you're saying.
Right,
but the point here is that every group must take responsibility for the people within their own enclave, right? You don't expect us to tell these people that are getting naked in the name of pride to tell them to put on
But they're not breaking the law.
It's disgusting. They are breaking. It's public indecency.
Okay.
That's
not,
not.
though, is it?
All right, hang on.
Public
It's
indecency.
literally not.
Hang on.
It is not.
Let me bring in Eli on this. Eli, is there a line that pride has crossed, as some people say? I mean, Jordan Peterson said about all this, there's a real tinge of narcissism, sexual narcissism about the whole pride spectacle. Do people have the right to express their sexuality?
That is really bold.
Let me finish his quote. Do people have the right to express their sexuality the way they see it, to some degree, if it's consensual and among adults? But generally among human beings with any degree of civilized comportment whatsoever, it's a pretty damn private affair. Has he got a point, Eli?
No, he doesn't. It's Jordan Peterson. He never has a point.
He's a very smart man who has lots of good points.
Was clearly demarked for adults. And I mean, personally, I was friends with some of the protesters that blocked New York City Pride. And what they're doing is blocking the human rights campaign Float, which is sponsored by Raytheon, who's currently committing genocide in Gaza. So they had their reasons for this, and there needs to be more context for all of these. On a broader level, we're not responsible for every member of our group. This is how the right latches on to our different identity categories and our different social movements to try to demonize all of us for the actions of a few that might be a little.
What about those who are not on the right, Eli, like me? I'm not on the right.
And
I'm a liberal.
You do that to people on the right all the time.
I'm a liberal who just sees endless acts of self-harm by the trans lobby. When actually I'm with you. I want you to get fairness and equality. But I don't want you eroding other people's rights.
You keep on saying this, and yet your actions speak differently.
What actions?
Folks, if you're enjoying the video and want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe. Now let's jump back in.
What action?
I'm trying to get trans people banned from sports, comparing
I don't want them banned from sports.
Hang
on, don't misquote me.
Animals.
I don't want trans people banned from sports. I want them to be disallowed from competing against biological women. Different thing. I want them to be able to compete in
with
sport.
People of their own gender.
Or their own sex. They should compete with people of their own sex.
I think I just saw a head explode.
That is exactly the type of talking point that in 20 years we're going to be looking back at and regretting.
Really? So you think in 20 years' time in the Olympics? So to be clear then, in the Olympics, you would have just, open Olympics?
Open season.
Sex is irrelevant? Gender irrelevant? Everyone just competes against each other?
Absolutely.
I would too.
Really? So do you understand?
Well, everyone just can.
Eli, do you understand that by doing that, you literally end the Olympics? It's all over because only men would win. Do you understand that? That's why we separate them.
I don't want to take this down.
Now, hang on. I want Eli to respond. You literally are destroying the Olympics for anyone who's not a man.
Well, that's a very grandiose vision of it, but
not really. Not really. If you look at the times and the results of men Olympians against women Olympians, you will see that in almost, I think, 98% of all the events, men are so far ahead of women on speed, on power, and every other discipline. Women would never
separated by categorization.
Women would never win a medal again at the Olympics if you had your way. Is that what you want?
That's very sexist.
No, it's
do you know that the
it's a
first
physical.
woman
Hang on,
to-
it's not sexist.
Do you know the first woman that
hang on, James,
swam
I'll
the
come to
channel?
you. I'll come to you. It is not sexist. It is a fact. It's why we separate the sexes. When Megan Rapinoe finished her career playing the soccer team, American women's soccer team, she then said that she'd be happy to see a trans woman competing in the women's team, right? Which is fine because it wouldn't take her place. But if you allowed trans women, football players, soccer players, to compete, and enough of them began to do this, there would be no biological women left in the women's national soccer team because they would be physically
trans
superior.
People already have the right to do that, and you're not seeing the results that you say you would be seeing.
Yeah, but you see, you and James both have this wonderfully quaint notion that if you open up the Olympics for everyone, that women would continue to win medals. They wouldn't. They win nothing.
Obviously, this is complicated, Piers.
It's not complicated.
No, listen,
It's not complicated. It's why we separate them. Literally, when Megan Rapinoe's national women's soccer team played the Dallas under-15s, they lost 8-2. They were under 15-year-old boys.
Yeah, 15-year-old boys beat the U.S. women's soccer team. No joke. And I'm glad that Piers Morgan brought that up. But when you're so delusional that you believe the best women's players who get beat by high school boys ought to allow fully grown trained men to throw a wig on and compete with them in the spirit of quote-unquote fairness, all while playing feminists at the same time, you are the epitome of wokeness. But folks, let me know what your thoughts about Piers Morgan comments and what these woke lunatics had to say. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.